So it is a pleasure for us to have today in our Bar-Ilan University Vision Science Seminar, Professor Sarah Shomstein from George Washington University. Professor Shomstein is a Thelma Hunter Professor of Cognitive Neuroscience and a chair at the George Washington University's Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences. Her research interests are focused on investigating the neural mechanisms of attentional selection by combining both behavioral and neuroimaging techniques in neurotypicals as well as in brain-damaged populations. She did her BS in psychology in Carnegie Mellon University and graduated with honors. She then did an MA in psychology at Johns Hopkins University and then continued to a PhD there in psychological and brain sciences under the supervision of Professor Steve Yantis, where she investigated multimodal control of selective attention, the role of parietal lobes during attentional shifts. She did a postdoc at Carnegie Mellon and then moved to George Washington University, where she is now faculty. She's the editor-in-chief of Attention, Perception, and Psychophysics, and she has served in multiple editorial roles before that in different journals. She has received multiple awards and honors. She has given dozens of invited talks, published dozens of scientific research papers, many of which are in high-profile journals as Current Opinion in Neurobiology, PNIS, Psych Science, Journal of Neuroscience, and more. And although there is much more to say, I will stop here and welcome you, Sarah, to our seminar to hear about your exciting research. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sharon, for inviting me. And I hope I can tell you a little bit about attention and my current thoughts on the mechanisms of attentional selection. And thanks, everyone, for coming on such short notice. So, let me start by saying I haven't given a Zoom talk in a while, which is probably a good thing. So I'll remember. I think, can you see my laser pointer? Perfect. And I guess a bit of a warning, or not a warning ahead of time, but if I understand that the audience is some are attention researchers, some are not. If anything isn't clear, I don't know, Sharon, what the style is, but for clarifications, do sort of raise your hand or interrupt me in any way that will clarify what I am talking about. So the goal of what I do in my lab and my personal scientific pursuit is really to understand how attention is distributed in a scene. So let's take a scene like this. This is a scene outside of my office on a not snowy day, like it is today in DC, but on a summer day. Usually I just step out of my office, get onto this pathway, and walk 2 blocks down, and then turn to the right and jump on the metro to come home. And as you all know, and I'll just say it because as an attention researcher, you're supposed to say it every time you give a talk, otherwise your card gets taken away from you. And that is that, there's really too much in the scene to process for our brain, for our selection system. And so what we have is a mechanism that prioritizes or selects a subset of information for further processing that's important for accomplishing your goal. And so here is what we know about what kinds of information from a scene like this influences attention. So there we go. So one of the things that we know is that bright things that are very different from their surrounding environment will demand your attention or capture your attention by mere fact of their salience. So, this orange thing right here is probably capturing your attention. This red over here, because there's nothing red around it. Some color over here that's different from everything else. So things that are salient, bright, and different from everything around it will capture your attention. Another thing that, of course, guides attention is the goal the goal of the organism, things that are relevant to the task that you're doing. My task here is to walk down this block, walk down another block, and turn to the right to get on the metro. And so this pathway is really relevant for my goal. And outside of that, it's really unclear what other things are processed. But this is what we know, that salient and goal-directed things influence attention. So this has been a model here on the left, recently reviewed, or not so recently anymore, but reviewed by Bilopolsky and Tawas, that attentional selection, right, things that are selected to influence behavior, are put into this integrated, what's called priority map. We know that this priority map actually can be sort of likened to an area in the posterior parietal cortex that has spatial selective neurons, where there is a spatial map of the layout, where there is a priority assigned, for example, to this location in space if this is salience, this location in space, and this location in space if it is consistent with current goals of the organism. So that has been the model until 2012. And things have been well in the world. And the idea is that this integrated priority map then goes on to influence neurons in early visual cortex, in occipital cortex, in all the way down to areas V1, and things that are then appear in this particular location are processed faster and more accurate and get the benefit, attentional benefit that we all kind of understand and love. And this was the view of the world until several results started popping up, showing that things that are no longer relevant to the current goal, but were relevant before, influenced attention, that statistical regularities influenced attention, that reward that was associated with particular aspects that are not important anymore influence attention. And the thing was that these findings, and this is just a small subset of them, no longer fit into this two-box model of attentional selection. So they didn't fit in the current goals because they were not consistent with current goals anymore. And these things are definitely not salient. They're not bright. They're not different from the environment in any kind of physical salience kind of a way. So but yet they still influence the attention. And so to accommodate these findings, Bilopolsky and Tawas created this tri-box theory of attention and revised the model to include another box that was called selection history. So things that were important before still influence your attention. And so that is the state of the field from about 2012 and for the past 10 years. And so the thing about that made or sort of the reason of what I want to talk to you today is that there were findings from my own lab and other labs that also showed aspects of the environment that influenced attention that, again, didn't fit into this tri-box mechanism of attentional selection. So one of the things that I wanted to, and what we call these types of phenomena the attentional platypus, right? So just like the poor animal doesn't fit into any category really cleanly and nicely, it's not a mammal, it's not. So we call these attentional phenomena the attentional platypus, platypi or platypuses. I don't know, plural. It can't figure out which one is the right way. Seems like both work. But the point is that these findings don't quite neatly fit into these three boxes of attentional mechanisms or things that influence attention. And therefore, sort of there's a need to revise the current models of attentional control or attentional selection to incorporate, right, the plethora of aspects of the environment that do influence attention. So let me be very clear about what I mean by that, and we'll go through some of the examples. So again, let's just go back to the scene. One of the things that I want to call your attention to, no pun intended here, is that we talked about bright and salient things, right, that influence attention. So that's capture. We talked about task relevance, right? So this is this pathway. And maybe, I don't know, maybe somebody has a selection history with, I don't know, a car like this because you own one. And so it will influence your attention. And so that sort of takes care of these three boxes of capture, task relevance, and selection history. But what I want you to appreciate is that in this kind of environment, more information is irrelevant to the task and not salient than the information that I told you that is salient and relevant to the task. So in fact, in any kind of environment, a large majority of the sensory input is actually irrelevant to the task and not salient. Okay? And it would be a shame to think that this information is simply filtered out and doesn't influence attention, because at the drop of a hat, right, at the moment's notice, there might be something that happens in the environment that makes a particular aspect of the environment relevant now, and you don't want to build it from the ground up, right? You want to have it processed to some degree. So, so we're going to talk about, what I will talk about today is, let me go to the, well, let me say this here. So what I'm going to talk about today is only task irrelevant information. Okay, so, and I'm going to show you that task irrelevant information from the environment actually does go on to influence attention, and that there needs to be a revision of models. So one thing that I want to make clear here is kind of the terminology that I'm going to be using. So when we talk about being able to predict how attention is distributed in a scene and to figure out what influences attention, right? Whether it's task relevant or task irrelevant. I'm going to be talking about a priority map. I already mentioned it before in the posterior parietal cortex. And the idea is, right, that there is this spatial map in the posterior parietal cortex, and this has been shown by many neurophysiological and neuroimaging studies. I just list some of them here of reviews, where a particular feature of attention goes on to modulate a particular spatial location in this attentional priority map, and subsequently, and this is what I call sources, okay, and subsequently goes on to influence behavior and influence sensory areas. So let's say this could be, insert your favorite measure here. This could be response time, and so things that are attended or things that are prioritized here in the priority map will have faster response time. Or if you're looking at early visual cortex, you'll have a higher signal to items that are prioritized. Okay, so we're going to be talking about sort of sources and effects, always examining a source and its effect on behavior. So today, there are three attentional platypuses that I will talk about or show you evidence for, and then kind of reconsider attentional mechanism or attentional or tri-box attentional model with you. So we're going to talk about, in all of the cases, it is task irrelevant knowledge about the size of the object in the real world. Okay, that's going to be the first one. We're going to talk about task irrelevant knowledge about semantic relationships between objects, and we're going to talk about this in the unisensory modality in vision, but also I'll talk about our most recent work on cross-modal semantic influences on attention. And I'm going to talk about the knowledge that we have about how we use objects, the affordances of objects, that some objects are manipulable and others are not. In all of the cases, again, I know I'm like repeating myself, but this is really important. All of these aspects of the scene, of the stimuli that we're going to be showing are going to be irrelevant to the task. They'll have nothing to do with what the person is doing. And so that virtue, it doesn't neatly fit into these three boxes that I'm showing on the left. All right, so let's start with the first attentional platypus, the task-irrelevant size of the object. Okay, so this is a picture of an alleyway in Morocco, and the reason why you're not freaked out by this giant cat and this tiny human is because you understand that cats have a particular size in the world. And so even though these two objects, if we're just focusing on the cat and the man, take the same amount of space on your retina, okay, they are different, right, in terms of their size in the real world. And so you know that the cat is close to you and the man is far away. And the question is, does this knowledge of size of the object, independent of the retinal size, influences attention? Or does your attentional selection system interact with these two objects differently? Oop, I need to advance this way. And we know from some research in late 80s by Castiello and Amilta that the physical size, okay, not the knowledge, right, not the retinal, so the retinal size of the object actually influences attention in a different way. So this was a set of simple experiments. I'm sort of summarizing them here. Participants were presented with either small squares or large squares and were presented with a target in the middle. And participants had to perform either discrimination, identification. There were a series of experiments. But the size of the box seemed to have modulated the way participants interacted perceptually with the scene, such that people were faster to detect the presence of a circle that was presented in a small square as compared to the large square. Okay, so faster here than here. So somehow the smaller size facilitates processing of an object. This was also then followed up, and then this finding was ignored for a number of years until the research of Talia Kunkel and Oliva that showed that there is a functional topography in the human brain according to the size of objects, knowledge of size of objects, because here this tractor is the same sort of retinal size as this paperclip. But there was a clear topography such that large objects had more medial representation and more dorsal representation here marked in blue, and smaller objects more lateral and more ventral. Now, this was an interesting finding and very peculiar, but it was unclear how that, this topography actually, whether it matters functionally, whether it goes on to influence behavior. And so this is the first experiment that I'm going to show you about. This was done with my graduate student at the time, AJ Collegio. What we asked here is, given that the two objects are same retinal size, but different real world size, right? Different real world size. Does the processing of these objects goes on to influence attention in a different way? Of course, if it's the retinal object size that guides attention, then if we plot response time here on the y-axis. If the retinal size is the same, then attention should be interacting with these objects in the same kind of a manner. But of course, if it's a canonical object size or the knowledge of the size of an object in the real world that guides our attention, then just like in Castiello and Amilta, right, in the physical difference, participants should be faster to identify the target that is embedded, let's say, in a real world large object should be slower than the real world small object. Okay, so that's the prediction. So here's what we did. I'm having this, I can't point because my face is in the way. So that's annoying. I'm going to move this. Okay, here we go. That's better. Okay, so what we did was we created a group of small objects, and these are handheld or smaller, and a group of large objects, and these are body size or larger. Okay, and they have different types of orientation, horizontal, canonical orientation, horizontal or vertical, both for small and large objects. And then what we did is we presented these objects either vertically or horizontally, only showing you vertical orientation here, in a kind of this classic Posner queuing paradigm task. So let's go through a trial here. Participants saw a fixation point, and they saw an object centrally presented. Then there was a queue that queued them to a particular location on an object. Then there was a short delay. And then a target and a distractor appeared. And the target could be either a letter T or a letter L that was kind of oriented every which way. And participants had to perform a target identification task to tell us whether there was a T or an L presented. And the distractor was a TL hybrid. So it was a little bit of a difficult task. Now, one thing that I really want you to understand here is that the object on which the targets appear is completely task irrelevant. Okay, you can perform this task. If I take away the object, the task is the same. Okay, T or L discrimination. And we did this task with either objects from small group or large group. So here is an example of a large object. Okay. And again, as I said, they were presented vertically and horizontally, and we checked for all the orientation and other low-level factors that could differ between these two groups. All right, and so here is the result. On the, now it's interfering with this. Okay, how about I do that? Okay, so here are the results, and now I lost my pointer. Okay, regained it. So here are the results of the experiment. What we have is reaction time on the y-axis here in milliseconds, and our conditions for when the, and I think I forgot to mention this, the target could appear either in the queued location on the target or in the non-queued location on the target. So here we have valid is when the target appears in the queued location, and invalid when the target appears in the opposite end of the object. And of course, Q could appear either on the top, on the bottom, on the left, on the right. All that is counterbalanced. And what you can appreciate here is that reaction time was modulated by or influenced by whether the target appeared on either a small object or canonically small object. Remember, the objects are exactly the same in terms of retinal location, right? So the only thing that differs is whether you know that the object is large or you know that the object is small. And just like in the physical difference of Castiello and Umilta, participants were faster to identify a target that was embedded in the canonically small object or as opposed to canonically large object. And this difference was smaller in the valid location and was greater in the invalid location. So there was an attentional modulation by task irrelevant canonical size of the object. Okay. Now, we thought this was a crazy finding. And so we did many experiments to convince ourselves that this, in fact, was a real finding. It's in the paper. If you're interested in all of them, all of the experiments that we did, I invite you to take a look at the paper, but I'll tell you just about some of the aspects that I thought were interesting. So after participants performed this task, we then showed them these objects one at a time and asked them on a Likert scale to rate how large or small the object is, okay? Because maybe for whatever reason, the pool table is large to me, but it's kind of not too large, not too small to you. And so we collected these kinds of ratings from participants. So here are these size ratings, participant ratings for each of the objects and the corresponding response time. And the thinking is the larger you think the object is, the slower your response time should be. And that is exactly what we found. So these are our objects. So each dot is an object, has an average size, and we found a significant correlation here that the larger the size of the larger the rating of the object is, the slower the response time. Of course, we looked at this and we were kind of worried that you have two clouds, and of course, when you have two clouds, you're going to have a nice correlation. So first thing that we did was to say, all right, let's do a median split on the ratings and see if it fits our groups, right? We assigned particular objects to a small group, particular objects to a large group. Is that consistent with people's responses? And here in blue are the small objects. In yellow are the large objects. So, everybody thought what we thought was small, large is large. But also within each of the clouds, you have the same kind of correlation, okay? Such that the larger you think the object is, the slower your response time is to identify a target that has nothing to do with that object, right? So, but this aspect of the object is the size is processed and it goes on to influence attention. Okay, one other thing that we did that I'll tell you here is that we thought, okay, fine, if this is the knowledge of the object size that influence your attention, then if we take away the knowledge, we should take away the attentional benefit. And so here on the y-axis, what I'm plotting is the difference in response time between the large and the small. Okay, so this is the original experiment that I showed you. We call it the no scramble. And then what we did, we scrambled the features of each of the objects just a little bit. It's called the retinotopic scrambling. We basically stacked up all of the objects on top of one another and then picked the pixel and then rearranged all the pixels. And some of the objects were still kind of recognizable, although this is a new group of participants. So, you see this, you would have never seen this kind of domino before. But, and some are less recognizable. So you've taken away some of the knowledge. And so when we did that, we reduced the effect. Interestingly, the effect was still significant because of the recognizability of some of the objects. But we reduced it, we halved it. And then we did the full scramble where we did not constrain what kind of scrambling we did. And in that case, of course, we completely took away the knowledge, right, of what the object is. And therefore, we took away the benefit or of knowledge of the object size. So, right, here was an example of knowledge of the object, of its canonical size, and that goes on to influence how your attention interacts with it. Okay, it's modulating attention. It doesn't fit in the top down because it has nothing to do with your goal. It doesn't fit with the bottom up because it's not salient. It can be filtered out completely. And it doesn't really fit into hysteresis. You might say, well, but you have experiences with objects, and so that kind of goes into that box. Okay, let's keep that in mind. All right, let me tell you about another attentional platypus, and this is semantic relationships among objects that are, again, not task relevant, not salient, have nothing to do with your task. But of course, in this scene, this is a car, and this is a car, and this is a car, and that is a car, right? And even though it has nothing to do with my goal of walking down to the metro, attention, right, in this kind of way that I was talking about, that you would want to process as much of the scene as possible. It could be that there is this relationship, semantic relationships among task irrelevant objects that actually help to process or pre-process the scene and contribute to that kind of attentional prioritization map that we talked about. So a while back, we showed that if you present we showed that semantic relationships among task relevant objects go on to influence attentional allocation. So we showed this with my former postdoc, George Malcolm, where we showed that a object in the middle of the screen for just a little bit of time would let you think, sunflower related thoughts. And after that, we presented two objects. And the two objects, one of which was more closely related to that central object, and the other one was not related or more loosely related to the central object. And then in the typical fashion for task irrelevant kinds of tasks, we presented targets that had nothing to do with objects. There was no statistical regularity. Targets could appear in any of the locations equiprobably. And we asked participants to perform a target identification task, just like in the previous task before, TL discrimination. And we showed that targets that appeared on task-irrelevant semantically related objects, SR here stands for semantically related, were processed faster and more accurately than targets that appeared on the non-related object. Okay, showing that task-irrelevant semantic relatedness influences attention. We did a time course study. We showed that there is a time course to this. It's not important for today's talk. And so the next step, what we did, we asked whether let me go back. Whether the semantic relatedness influenced spatial attentional allocation such that, this spatial location is now more prioritized than this spatial location of where the target appears, or is it that the object identities are somehow enhanced? Okay, so object representations are stronger. And for that, we needed to use fMRI, and so we did. So we did a lot of establishing regions of interest ahead of time. So first thing that we did is we did retinotopic mapping. We figured out locations on the screen where we're going to be showing these semantic related and non-related objects. And so then we had our early visual cortex areas V1 through V3 identified. We then also looked at the or mapped IPS, inferior parietal sulcus. This is that attentional priority map. This is the spatial regions in the parietal cortex that I'm sort of equating with attentional priority map. So we created areas IPS, inferior parietal sulcus, 0 through 2. And we also looked at the lateral occipital cortex. So we performed a localizer for object selective regions in LOC. And as you can tell, right, with the questions that I just posed, LOC is going to tell us about the object representation. Okay, because that's object selective cortex, and IPS is going to tell us about this kind of spatial priority for the semantically related object. Okay, so I'm showing you results in a single graph here. Let me just orient you to it. So the task is the same, targets that have nothing to do with the objects that appear on either semantically related or non-related objects. So on the y-axis, we have percent signal change. Here, first is the early visual cortex. The reason why I'm not showing you V1, V2, V3 separately is because we didn't have any interactions with the region. So what was true for V1 was true for V3. And so we collapsed this, and we show that in the early visual cortex in the areas V1 through V3, targets that appeared on the semantically related object elicited greater response right? Remember, we're talking about these effects of attention. So attention had semantic relatedness, had an effect on processing targets, but what had an effect is the task irrelevant semantic relatedness among the objects. So targets that appeared on the semantically related object were processed more elicited, a higher response, percent signal change than targets that appeared on the non-related response. The same was true in the inferior parietal sulcus. This is our attentional priority map, showing that in this kind of spatial representation, there was a higher activation for the location that was occupied by the semantically related object as opposed to non-related object. And we did not see the difference in LOC. Okay, and this suggested us, although with caution, right, this is a null result ultimately, but suggested to us that definitely spatial attention is influenced by the semantic relatedness, and perhaps not the objectness itself. But again, right, we don't want to reason from the null. We didn't see the difference in LOC for what it's worth. We predicted that we would, but we didn't. So then we also did a second experiment where that was a little bit different. It also, we presented semantically related pairs. And so we had 4 semantically related pairs and 4 semantically non-related pairs. You see that all the objects are kind of intermixed here. And what we did was we presented, the paradigm was a little bit different. Again, the objects are task irrelevant. I don't know if you can see this, but there are small Gabor patches that are placed on top of each object. And the Gabor patches could either match in orientation or mismatch in orientation. And that's what the task of the participant was, to say whether Gabor patches matched or did not match. And we wanted to give ourselves a better chance to look at the LOC response. And so instead of looking at bold response, we now looked at our ability to decode whether the pair that was presented was the semantically related pair or semantically non-related pair. So chance would be 25% because we now have 4 pairs, or we're decoding each particular semantically related pair from the others. And so now again, the task is exactly the same. We have semantically related, non-related objects. You have your Gabor patches that appear on these irrelevant objects. First of all, we show in the scanner a behavioral benefit for showing these Gabor patches on the pair of semantically related and non-related objects. Okay, so behavior is important. Now we can go and look at what's happening neurally. And so here I'm showing you a decoding accuracy, or being able to decode a particular pair, that it was higher in the semantically related pair than non-related pair, showing that, right, there is a better representation in the earlier visual cortex for the pair of objects that are semantically related. Again, objects have nothing to do with the task. The task is T's or L's. We also show that in the left inferior frontal gyrus, a region that has been shown to be engaged for semantic relatedness of task-relevant things, the higher the activity was in the left inferior frontal gyrus, this is now, I'm plotting behavioral semantic facilitation, right? Because I showed you before that targets were identified on the semantic pair faster than on the non-related pair. So response time was facilitated by the amount of activity in the left inferior frontal gyrus. So if there was more activity in terms of like semantic relatedness in the left inferior frontal gyrus, the shorter your response time was to say whether the Gabor patches were oriented identically or not. And again, showing that there is this influence of your knowledge, right? Presumably computed in the left inferior frontal gyrus, right? This is the source, and having an effect on the early visual cortex. So the of course, right, everything I've been talking about had this kind of a scene, it's a visual scene, and I'm ignoring also another aspect of our environment, and that is that it's cross-modal, that we have auditory signals coming in at the same time. And so for this work that we're doing with my graduate student, Kira Wagner-Clemens, we're actually looking at exactly the same kind of a question of semantic relationship between sort of objects, right? But now instead of the semantic relatedness being visual, we also have an auditory signal that's semantically related. Now, here's just imagine this kind of a paradigm. Here it's a visual search task. You have to search for a drum. And so you have this drum here, and then you can present a semantically a sound that is semantically related to the object that you're looking for and non-related. But the thing is, that's not quite interesting in and of itself. What we did is we created the sight sound database during COVID when we couldn't run an actual participants. So Kira created a sight sound semantic database where she got ratings from human participants about relative semantic relatedness of particular sounds to a picture or picture to a particular set of sounds. So now what we can do is we can have a graded kind of scale of semantic relatedness, not just, you know, a cactus is related to the sunflower and a saw is not, but rather how is saw not related or less related. But now this is with sounds. And so here, just to give you an example of one of the matrices that we have freely available in OSF as a database for everyone to use. So let's say this is a drum, you're searching for a drum, and of course you can have a sound of the drum here, right? And that would be perfect correlation, that's related, right? But then you can have like a symbol, and we know from human ratings that it's about 0.75 related. Or you can have a guitar that's even less related, right? So now you have the scale. And of course, and here's a violin that's even less related to the drum. And so now what we did was we predicted that the more, again, sounds are irrelevant to the task, right? You know what you're searching for in the visual domain. And so we predicted that this task irrelevant sound, if it's more related, you should have faster response times. It should help you find your target faster as opposed to slower, as opposed to less related. And that's exactly what we find. We did it in two groups of objects that we created this database for. One is animals, one is instruments, and in both kinds of categories, what you can see is we're plotting RT. These are z-scored, lots of participants, different baselines, so we z-score them on the y-axis, and on the x-axis we have a degree of semantic relatedness, and you can see that your search time is speeded up by the presence of a task irrelevant sound and by the sort of its relative, right, the scaling of semantic relatedness, again, of task irrelevant sounds. Okay, so now I showed you that task irrelevant semantic relationships, right, between task irrelevant objects influence attentional allocation. Again, they don't easily go into any one of these three boxes. Okay, how am I doing on time, Sharon? How much time do I have?
Like 10 minutes,
Perfect.
no
Okay,
problem at all. Yeah,
excellent. Excellent. I don't need any more. Okay, then I'll tell you
lovely.
about one more thing. One more attentional platypus, and that is the affordances of objects. How knowledge of whether an object is manipulable or not goes on to influence attention as well. Okay, so for that, just a little kind of foray into the what and where stream. I understand Alex Martin recently gave a talk as well. So Here, let's say this is, this is a beautiful painting. You have a cup and you have a plant. We usually pick up cups. Actually, that reminds me to take a sip. And we don't usually handle plants unless we repot them every once in a while. Okay, so one is more manipulable, the other one is less so. And we know from the streams of visual processing that um, that objects that are manipulable, okay, take sort of the start with parasol cells in the retinal ganglion cells, right, all the way back or front in the eye, and project to the dorsal stream, to the magnocellular pathway. And what we know about the cells in the magnocellular pathway is that they have high temporal resolution and low spatial resolution, compared to cells in the ventral pathway that take their start from the midget cells in the retinal ganglion and project to the parvocellular pathway that form the ventral pathway. And these cells actually have low temporal resolution and have high spatial resolution. Now, why is that important? That's important because then what we can do is we can create, and there's one thing I want to say, that there is also evidence, neural evidence, but not behavioral evidence, showing that manipulable objects elicit greater dorsal stream activation and non-manipulable than non-manipulable objects, non-tools. Okay, so in the dorsal stream, if you're seeing a cup, it has more activation than you're seeing something stationary. And as I said, dorsal and ventral objects have different histological properties and inputs from retinal ganglion cells, right? Midget versus parasol cells that have different properties. So we reasoned that there's got to be consequences for behavior of this kind of differential activation and differential projections. And of course, in our fashion, we want to make these objects task relevant. So here's what we did. We created a set of objects that are non-tools and tools. So here are non-tools, and these are more sort of stationary, and these are more manipulable. Okay, and we created two groups. We created these kinds of diagrams of objects, and also we took the real objects. Same thing, only real object. Okay, so we now have two types of groups, and whatever experiments we're going to do, we're going to do this on both sets of objects. And then what we did is we created two tasks. One that tapped into that high spatial properties of cells and high temporal properties of cells. But we're going to do a behavioral task. This is going to be a behavior that taps into the neural properties of the two pathways. So in the first task is the spatial task. We're going to present two objects either to the left, one object either to the left or to the right of the fixation point. And what we're going to have is we're going to have a little gap that sometimes is present on the bottom of the object. Okay, so your task is to detect a gap, a presence of a gap. You don't have to do anything with the object itself, just present whether there is a gap. So that's the spatial task, right? You need to have a high spatial resolution, and we actually staircase this to be very specific for each for each participant. So it's a hard task. Another task is, again, with the same objects that are either manipulable or non-manipulable, like I showed you in the previous slide. But now what we had is there was either either the object appeared on the screen for the whole time, or there was a little gap of 16 milliseconds when there was nothing on the screen, and participants had to say whether there was a temporal gap or not. Okay, so you have two tasks, spatial and temporal, one that taps into high spatial resolution, the other one that steps into a higher temporal resolution. And the idea is that you should be better, right, for temporal, in the temporal tasks for manipulable things, and in the spatial task for non-manipulable things. And this is exactly what we see with a caveat. So we see here's a D prime. You're more sensitive to identify a gap, okay, in the non-manipulable things, okay, than in the manipulable objects. And we saw no difference in the temporal task, but that is because the task was too easy. You see that our D prime here is 3, so they're really at ceiling. So when and actually I wanted to show you that, right, this is the kind of caricatures of objects, and here's real objects, and the effect is exactly the same. Now, when we make the task more difficult, we now actually show here's the response time, and we now show that response time for manipulable objects in this temporal tasks is actually faster for the manipulable objects than non-manipulable objects. So we now have two effects, right? One in the ventral stream for the spatial resolution task for non-manipulable benefit and for the manipulable objects in the temporal task. I'm going to skip this, or actually, I'll say it very quickly, right? Just like before, we wanted to make sure that we could manipulate this effect. So if we take away the knowledge of whether something is manipulable or not, we should be able to take away the difference, right? So we thought, oh, what's the easiest way to do this? We just rotated the objects upside down, right, to reduce the knowledge a little bit. And when we do this, here's upside up. This is the result that I already showed you. And this was done, I should say, with my former graduate student, Dick Doubledy, and he is very clever. So he called this upside up and this upside down. And so what you can see that in the right side up, right here's our result, the benefit for a spatial task for non-manipulable. And then if you simply rotate the objects, right, upside down, you reduce the effect. Here, we actually get rid of it completely, and the interaction is significant. So it really is something about the knowledge. Okay. So task-irrelevant affordances also influence attention, right? So I showed you now these three things, and you can say, okay, well, maybe we can put all of this in the hysteresis, right? Like you know what you kind of do with the objects, whether you manipulate them or not. You know if they're semantically related or not. You know their previous size. But then this box becomes like a catch-all for a whole host of features that influence attention and then loses its kind of benefit, right? If it's a catch-all category. So this is what I'm gonna propose here is that instead of thinking about this kind of tri-box model of attention, we should think about attentional prioritization here in terms of all the things that influence attentional allocation, right? I told you about semantic associations. Like, let's put that here. We know that spatial locations influence attention from previous research. My other research that I've done for a long time with object-based attention, we know that that influences attentional allocation. We know that strategies, co-occurrences, reward, temporal fluctuations, object size, affordances, auditory signals, right, all influence attention. And so instead of thinking about kind of the three boxes, we should start thinking about, or we should continue and stop thinking about the boxes, but rather think about all the things that influence attention. And now start to begin to understand how knowing that everything influences attention, which is basically what I showed you today, right? That everything influences attention. And this, of course, brings with itself a challenge. How do we study everything? I don't know. I don't have the answer. But I do know that since everything influences attention, then the time is ripe is to maybe move beyond just thinking about how a single feature influences attention, but start thinking about how these multiple features interact to influence attention. And our suggestion is that there is this kind of dynamic attentional prioritization that fluctuates from moment to moment, that each of these factors have a weight associated with it. So this is the W that comes with it. And now it would be it's important to start sort of thinking how these features interact with one another to set the weights accordingly. Okay, and Joy Gang and I are currently thinking about this as we're writing a piece for annual review of visual science, and that's in prep, but coming to your neighborhood journal. So that's all I wanted to say. I do I do want to finish with one last thing, and that I do understand that this is a challenge to kind of view attention in this way, but it's becoming more and more apparent that it is that way. So just because it's difficult, that it shouldn't stop us. And we're already starting several experiments in the lab that are putting these features together and looking at the kind of interactive ways in which they influence attention. So with that, I want to thank my lab and my funding sources, and I want to thank you for your attention.
Lovely. So I want to invite everybody to unmute yourselves to give Sarah a big applaud for a wonderful, and I myself wrote down like 10 questions already.
Uh-oh.
But
Oh, look at the
not
time.
gonna, no, I'm not gonna bombard you with all of them. Some of them are gonna arrive via email. But let me just so I will start. Is it okay to ask questions? Are you up to it?
Absolutely.
Okay, lovely. So my first, well, maybe overall-ish kind of question is um, the state of the observer. I mean, because you started when you gave your example, this is a scene and I'm walking down here. I mean, I'm walking down the street. I got to go to, the metro station and basically, we're talking about the action, and your goal is to reach, a location. I mean, you could have also waited for a taxi to pick you up, or taken your bicycle, or maybe there was um, and your goal is to move in the environment, and it's something very, very different from what we see. First of all, I don't know this place, and I've never walked down that street. And it's not relevant to me because I'm not going to be walking there, but still, because I've got all this, I've got such, well, we all have, our visual history, our visual statistics that have been built up. I understand this is a street, and I understand that if I'm there, I'll be able to manage myself around the environment, but it's relevant for moving around and all these things that may be salient are maybe about what's going to happen now. What should I attend to because it may affect me. So I'm just thinking about, the not just thinking about it visually or, how it's going to be affecting the observer. Why would
Yeah.
you need attention at all if nothing's going to be affecting you? So, it's a very big philosophical question,
Right.
but
But I
that's,
think,
yeah,
yeah, Sharon, I think you're really putting a finger on this, right? You're saying, look, like I have never been in the scene before, and things could be important to me. And so there's the statistical regularities, everything you know about the scene. What you're describing is you know how large or big the objects are, you know what objects you can pick up, you know what objects are related to each other, and in what way they're related to one another. And that's exactly what I'm showing here, that all of that information, all of that, um, uh, um, all of the signals, right, go on to impinge onto the attentional priority map. Now, and the thing is, it doesn't neatly fit into this our ideas of what's goal directed, right? But the thing is, what I guess one way to think about this is redefining what goal-directed behavior is. To me, what I think goal-directed behavior is, even for me in that path, right, is not just to reach that end of 2 blocks and turn right. The goal-directed behavior for me is to process as much information as possible so that should my goal change, should I meet somebody and they say, well, no, actually, let's go get a drink, right? I don't have to build up the scene from ground up. I already have the kind of the blocks, right, that have contributed to my attentional priority map, had an effect, right, on the processing and help me to reach my next behavior the next time. So it's exactly the way that I'm thinking about it, the way you're describing. All of it matters, right? To different degree at a different moment in time, but all of it.
exactly. Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. Because I'm thinking, if suddenly a snowball is going to be, flying over, your goal is going to change. You're going to have to,
That's right.
dunk down or whatever so it's an, ever changing. Okay, Yafa says she has to
Yeah, I
run, but
saw
it was
that.
an
Yeah.
excellent talk, and thank you. Okay,
So,
yeah, so I've got many more questions, but
mhm.
yes, I'm putting myself aside for, yeah, Jeremy.
Uh, so this is lovely. And with all the little weights there, it would be compatible with things like Liesfeld and Mueller's dimension weighting
Yeah.
ideas about how to put together a a priority map, for example. And that leads me to wonder whether we have a bit of a problem with the boxologies that we create here, and the three box version with top down, bottom up, and history or something is one three box one. You've now got a gazillion box one. Maybe it is important to try out on
Weights.
these weights, in the sense that the effects you were showing were undoubtedly real and also in most cases rather small, right? When you're getting an improvement in decoding from 27%, I think, to 28% in LOC on one of your slides. That's nice. I'm glad it's statistically significant. But things like the classic top-down and bottom-up influences are arguably an order of magnitude or more bigger
Yeah.
than that. So is maybe the way forward to say, yes, it's too simple just to, talk about a old Koch and Ullman kind of salience map or something, but many of these effects are actually quite small, even if real.
So, okay. Fair enough. Very important point that goal-directed effects are 100 milliseconds, let's say, on attention, right? So let's kind of break this down because I want to push back, Jeremy, a little bit on your saying like, oh, these are such small effects and that's nice, but um, so look, the attentional selection system has been fine-tuned for many, many, many years. And it is arguable that
Since
we're operating.
1980, at least.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, I think you're thinking evolutionary time, and I was thinking, oh, since 1980 or so.
Yeah, I'm thinking evolutionary time.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, let's go big. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So so we are already operating at probably the maximum, right? Or yeah, I mean, we're still evolving, but and our selection system is also evolving, but we're operating at this really, really optimal level where we're trying to extract as much from the environment as possible. Yes, goal-directed effects are going to be in your 100 millisecond ranges. Although, other people that study other cognitive behavior will say, well, that's very little, but okay, that's fine. We're attention researchers, so let's say 100 milliseconds is a lot. The thing is, yes, I'm showing you a 14 millisecond benefit of your knowledge of whether something is large or small in the real world, right? That's a 14 millisecond benefit. That is not lost on me. But the thing is that it's a 14 millisecond benefit of an object that has nothing to do with your behavior. Yet it fine tunes your really optimal system even further, right? Like there isn't much space there to go. Otherwise, we would have been operating at that level, right? That gives you that benefit. And there's other little things, that aspects of the environment, that semantic relatedness, also small benefits, but on top of an already well-oiled, right, highly functioning machine. So that those extra benefits, I would say, are even more valuable, okay, than the large effects that you get with goal-directed. We're always orienting in a goal-directed fashion. It's what else is giving that extra edge. Okay, so even though these effects are small, I'm going to say that these are very important small effects. And they're large in sort of in their contribution because it's already moving. You're at the ceiling, yet it's moving you even to perform more efficiently.
I- I'll I'll restrain myself and pass the baton to Nurit.
Thank you. Wait.
If that's okay.
Hi, Nuri.
Thanks, Jeremy, and hi, Sarah. Beautiful talk.
Thanks.
And beautiful findings. I feel like we need to make a really important distinction with regards to your last question and the whole talk, probably. Because obviously, I mean, we are human beings, we have our history, we have a lot of knowledge, long-term memory, blah, 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 and everything affects us, right? And we know a lot of things about the world. And I think this whole division that started from top down and bottom up started from the question of the capture of visual attention, right? When you're focusing on something and obviously you're not able to process everything in the world to a high resolution. So what would capture your attention? And then it started with the bottom up salient things. And then Folk et al. Came and said, well, it's not bottom up, it's your goals, right? That would cause a capture, an involuntary capture of attention, right? A shift of your visual attention from one point to another in the visual field. Now, I think that a lot of the things that you're talking about are things that would engage our attention once visual attention is guided to them or happens to fall on them, but I'm not sure that if you're focusing right now on a sunflower, let's say, and there's a cactus somewhere in the periphery, it would actually capture your attention like a flash in the Posner task, or I don't know, a red letter in the Folk et al. Task, right? So I think there are a lot of things that once your attention is there, they engage you because
Yeah,
they're interesting, because they're important, because of a million of reasons, right? Because they're
but I
big,
think
because they're small, because they are related to my history, they're related to my sister's history, whatever. But I think this division into boxes originated from the question of visual capture. And I
right.
think we need to ask whether all these factors actually would capture your attention. And
Well,
I
maybe
tend to think
it's
that some of them won't.
right, right. So that's the thing. Like, okay, but maybe we need to think about how we're defining attentional capture. Just like in the previous
True,
question, like when I was answering to Sharon, I said, well, we need to think about the definition of goal direction, right? What is goal directed?
true.
Um, and so, capture, I like the idea, and I have done a fair amount of capture research and sort of the way I think about capture that you talked about is this sort of a circuit breaker, right? It stops you
Yeah,
in whatever it is that you are doing. It
yeah,
doesn't matter if you're going to, go to the metro, if there is um, you know, a smell of some sort. Let's use a non-visual example for a change, right? If there's a smell of some sort that's going to, that either reminds you of something, like your grandma's cookies or whatever, you're gonna stop in your tracks and you're gonna reorient and you're gonna try to find the source of that, right? That kind of capture. But then also, if you start talking about like, things that involuntarily influence your attention,
true.
then
Yeah, I totally
right,
agree with you.
then we
Yeah,
start expanding that, but it's not a circuit breaker kind of thing. It's not going to stop you in your tracks, right? So there is a boundary there. But I just don't know how useful it is to continue sort of talking about these boundaries and start in putting things into this boxology, right? Like Jeremy was talking about, like it's just not useful anymore. But yeah, I agree with you. There is a different flavor of
I think it
things
might
that
be
put in.
more different types of like central attention, maybe. I'm not sure it's visual attention per se. That's what I'm trying to say.
I don't think it's visual. My whole point is that it doesn't need to be visual. The thing is, it's not,
Okay.
selection is not modality specific,
Yeah,
right?
I agree with you.
It's on to impinge onto that priority map. And that was sort of the reason why we expanded into the cross-modal stage, right? Show that this is not specific to vision. It's
Yeah,
specific to the environment, right? And
yeah,
whatever the
I
signals
agree.
are. Yeah, thanks.
Brilliant. I actually have a few more questions, but some of them I'm going to leave to the email because I don't want to. But I just wanted to um, uh, incorporating some of the things that you talked about, and whether you think, for example, the small, the letters versus the small um, areas, or do you think it's because, let's say letters as targets, I mean, you could perceive them as objects, but they're based on, let's say, more foveal representations, and that
Yeah.
would and do you think if you would have chosen something that is big, would that, just
Yeah. So in that study too, right, the canonical size, I had a hard time believing our own results. And so we did, I think, a set of 16 or something experiments where we change things, manipulate things. And so we also have Gabor patches that we used instead of the letters. There was a detection task instead of identification. All sorts of tasks still yield this. It's something that we worried about as well, that there was something about, specific about letters. And that doesn't seem to be the case. So it really is kind of like a general thing that physical size influences, how you detect or identify objects, and also canonical size, independent of physical size. Yeah, but that's a good question. We also worried about that.
okay. Lovely, lovely. So thank you so much for this, mind-blowing talk. And, of course, I'm really interested about the, how that fits with, don't say the word attention, but that's another, another question that we will have to bridge the gap, on or about. So thank you so much, Sarah, for being here and sharing this wonderful research with you. And I'm looking forward to reading your and Joy's new
We're
publication.
thinking about it. We're not writing it yet. We're just thinking about it.
Okay, okay.
No, we should be writing. That's the point. But
Okay,
thanks for inviting me, and thanks everyone for coming. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you,
lovely.
Sarah. Woo.
Wonderful. And next week, we are not having, we have a conference here, so we are not going to be having a seminar. And in 2 weeks, Nir, which may have already had to go, we will have another talk, probably also about attention or related to that. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining, and have a lovely 2025.
Yes.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Good to see you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.